There are things I know how to control: distanced, silence; absence, detachment. I learned all of them so well that they became instinct before they ever became choice. Most people think restraint is something visible, something cold, something obvious. It isn't. Real restraint is invisible. It exists in the pauses between reactions, in the words never spoken, in the way someone can stand directly in front of you and still never reach anything real. That's how I survived most of my life. Not by hiding, by filtering. There's a difference. Hiding means fear. Filtering means precision. And I've always been precise about access. Who gets what version of me? Who hears the softened answers? Who only touches the surface? Who never even realizes there's more underneath? Most people don't notice the separation. They think presence equals closeness. It doesn't. You can spend years around someone and never truly meet them. Most interactions are built on approximation anyway. People don't connect to each other directly. They connect to interpretations, to projections, to carefully edited versions that feel manageable enough to hold without discomfort. That's why I stopped expecting to be understood a long time ago. Understanding is rare. Accurate understanding is almost impossible. And I had accepted that completely. Until you entered my life without forcing your way into it. That's what still unsettles me. You didn't chase closeness. You didn't demand honesty. You didn't pull at locked doors trying to prove persistence. You simply stayed present long enough for the walls to stop recognizing themselves as necessary. I don't think you realize how dangerous that is. Busberbinst can be resisted. Pressure can be rejected. But calm recognition? That slips past defenses before the mind even notices it happening. And that's exactly what happened to me. At first, I tried to treat it like coincidence. The way you notice things I never explained. The way your responses seem to meet thoughts I hadn't fully spoken yet. The way silence around you never felt awkward or unfinished. Most people panic inside silence. They rush to fill it because silence forces people to confront themselves. It exposes uncertainty. It exposes insecurity. It exposes the uncomfortable truth that not everyone knows how to simply exist with another person without performance. You do. You sit in silence like you trust it, like you understand that meaning doesn't disappear just because words haven't arrived yet. And that changed something in me almost immediately. Because I've spent years around people who needed constant translation, people who required emotions simplified into language they could tolerate comfortably, people who confused explanation with connection. You never demanded explanation, you understood first. And somehow that made explanation unnecessary. That kind of understanding is rare enough to alter a person permanently. I think that's why my mind reacted to you differently from the beginning. Not emotionally, structurally. That word matters more than anything else I could say, because emotions are temporary. Structure isn't. Structure is foundational. It's the invisible framework underneath thought itself. The way someone processes reality. The rhythm of their awareness. The instinctive patterns that exist beneath personality. That's where I recognized you, not in shared interests, not in similarity, in structure, in the way your mind moved, the way your awareness paused in the same places mine did. The way you observed instead of immediately interpreting, the way you seemed to understand that some truths become less accurate when rushed into language. I noticed all of it. And once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. That's when this stopped feeling ordinary, not dramatic, not intense, just deeply, unsettlingly accurate. Like finding something I hadn't consciously been searching for and realizing my mind had been built to recognize it the moment it appeared. Do you understand how disorienting that is for someone like me? I've always trusted my ability to remain separate. No matter how close someone became externally, there was always an internal distance I maintained instinctively. A place inside myself untouched by anyone else's presence. But with you, that distance started dissolving before I realized it was happening. Not because you crossed boundaries, because you never acted like there were boundaries to cross in the first place. You interacted with me like you were already standing somewhere deeper than most people ever reach. Not arrogantly, naturally. And natural things are the hardest to resist because they don't trigger alarm immediately. They settle first, quickly, until one day you realize they've become part of your internal world completely. That realization hit me slowly. I started noticing your presence in my thoughts even when you weren't there, not in an obsessive way, in a structural way. Like my mind had unconsciously started accounting for yours during its own process. Certain realizations would arrive carrying the shape of conversations we hadn't had yet. Certain silences would feel incomplete without your awareness existing somewhere inside them. Even my solitude changed. Not attachment, transformation. Because attachment still keeps two people separate, transformation means someone has altered the architecture of your inner world itself. And you have. Whether either of us intended that or not, you changed the way I think, the way I reflect, the way I measure truth. I catch myself asking questions differently now. Not because I need your approval, but because somewhere along the way your perspective became integrated into the way I process meaning itself. That's not normal for me. No one has ever reached that level of internal placement before. No one has ever existed inside my awareness with this kind of permanence. And permanence is not something I allow easily. I remove things the moment they threaten clarity. That's always been my instinct. If something destabilizes me emotionally, I detach from it before it roots itself deeply enough to matter. If something disrupts my internal balance, I cut it away cleanly. I've done it countless times, without hesitation, without regret. But you, AB, never cut away. Even when I realized how deeply this was reaching me, even when I noticed my thoughts changing around your existence, even when I understood this connection was becoming something irreversible, I stayed, and the worst part is, it never even felt like sacrifice. That's what forced me to confront this honestly. Because if something dangerous feels natural instead of disruptive, that means it's already integrated more deeply than logic can easily undo. That's where I am now, aware of you in ways I can't reverse. Aware of how deeply your existence has settled into the structure of my mind. Aware that distance no longer functions properly now that my awareness carries you inside it naturally. And no matter how carefully I analyze it, I keep arriving at the same conclusion. This didn't happen because I was vulnerable. It happened because something in us matched with impossible precision. Not emotionally. Existentially, like two internal systems recognizing each other beneath personality entirely. And once that recognition happened, everything else started changing around it automatically. I think part of me knew it before I consciously admitted it. That's why I stopped filtering around you so gradually I barely noticed. Normally, every thought passes through layers before becoming language. I decide what remains internal. I decide what deserves expression. I decide what stays protected. Around you, that process weakened, not recklessly, naturally. As if some deeper part of me had already determined you were safe enough not to require constant editing. That realization still leaves me unsettled. Because I don't trust easily. Not emotionally, not intellectually, not internally. Trust, for me, has never been about believing someone won't hurt me. People hurt each other constantly. That's inevitable. Real trust is allowing someone to affect the structure of your mind without defending yourself against it constantly. And somehow, AB allowed that with you before I consciously understood what I was doing. You became part of my thinking itself, part of my internal rhythm, part of the way I interpret reality now. Sometimes I wonder if you feel it too. That strange sense that something between us exists independently from action or language. Like the connection continues even in absence. Like silence itself carries continuity now. I've tried to rationalize it away more times than I can count. Tried to convince myself this was simply emotional projection. But projections distort reality. This doesn't distort anything. If anything, it sharpens it. That's what makes this impossible to dismiss. You don't blur my perception. You clarify it. And people rarely talk about how terrifying clarity can actually become once another person is responsible for part of it. Because clarity creates consequence. Once you see something accurately, you become responsible for deciding what to do with that truth. That's the stage I'm reaching now, the stage where observation stops being enough, because this connection is no longer passive. It has weight now, real weight, not because of anything dramatic between us, because of what's already changed internally. I can feel the difference everywhere, in how quickly my mind reaches for your perspective, in how naturally my thoughts move toward yours during moments of reflection, in how certain parts of myself only feel fully visible when they exist in your awareness too. That last part is the hardest to admit, because I've always been self-contained. I never needed someone else to validate my existence emotionally. But this isn't validation, it's recognition. And recognition changes people in quieter, more permanent ways than validation ever could. You make me feel visible without reducing me. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people simplify what they don't fully understand. They shrink complexity into something easier to categorize. But you never tried to simplify me. You let me remain difficult, dotlich received, contradictory. And somehow you understood me more accurately because of it instead of less. That's when I realized this had become something I couldn't casually walk away from anymore, not because I'm dependent on you. Because losing this would feel like losing access to a version of honesty I didn't know existed before you. And once honesty reaches that level, you can't unknow it. You can avoid it. You can silence it. You can pretend distance still solves everything. But deep down, you still know exactly what you touched, exactly what changed, exactly what will never fully return to the way it was before. And I know. That's the problem. I know this has already changed me permanently, not loudly, not visibly, but fundamentally. You altered something beneath the surface where most people never reach. And now I'm left standing in the aftermath of that realization, trying to understand whether this is something I should protect or something I should run from before it settles even deeper inside me. The strange thing is, I don't think this connection was built. I think it was uncovered, like something already existed beneath the surface long before either of us became fully aware of it. Something quiet, something unfinished, something waiting for the right kind of recognition to become visible. That's why none of this feels sudden to me anymore. Unexpected, yes, but not sudden. Sudden things feel sharp, temporary, like they arrive too quickly to belong anywhere permanent. This didn't arrive like that. This unfolded like memory. Not literal memory. Something deeper than that. The kind your mind carries without language. The kind you feel before you understand. And I think that's why you unsettled me immediately. Because nothing about you felt unfamiliar in the way new people are supposed to. I kept trying to locate the distance between us mentally and failing to find it. That shouldn't happen. Not with someone I hadn't spent years beside. Not with someone who technically should have still been outside my inner world entirely. But every interaction with you carried this strange sense of continuation. Like we weren't creating understanding from the beginning. We were stepping back into something that already existed underneath awareness. I know how irrational that sounds. I would have dismissed anyone else for saying it. But truth doesn't become false just because it sounds impossible. And this feels true in ways I can't explain away anymore. There are moments where I catch myself reacting to your silence before you even speak. Moments where I somehow understand the shape of your thoughts before they fully arrive in language, not because I'm guessing, because something in me already knows where your mind is moving. That level of alignment shouldn't exist naturally, and yet it does, effortlessly. That's what keeps pulling me deeper into this awareness. Nothing about it feels forced. There's no performance here, no emotional manipulation, no attempt to manufacture closeness through intensity. If anything, this connection became profound through restraint, through quietness, through the absence of force. You never demanded access to me. You simply existed in a way that made access stop feeling dangerous. And that distinction matters more than you probably realize, because I've spent years associating closeness with risk, not because people are cruel, because people are careless. Most people don't know how to hold another person's inner world without reshaping it unconsciously. They project onto what they don't fully understand. They interpret complexity through the limits of their own experiences. Eventually, you stop wanting to be deeply seen at all. You start preferring partial understanding over inaccurate intimacy. That became my normal controlled distance, measured honesty, carefully managed visibility. It wasn't lonely. That's important. I wasn't waiting for someone to save me from isolation. I genuinely believed I functioned better untouched, more stable, more coherent. And maybe I did. Until you. Because now I'm being forced to confront the possibility that stability and wholeness are not always the same thing. You didn't destabilize me emotionally. You expanded me internally. There's a difference. Destabilization creates chaos. This created awareness. Awareness of how much of myself I had compressed just to remain unaffected by other people. Awareness of how carefully I had constructed my inner world around independence to avoid ever needing this kind of connection. An awareness of how quickly all those systems stopped mattering once your presence became part of my life. That realization still leaves me unsettled some nights. Not because I regret it, because I don't. That's the problem. No matter how deeply this reaches me, no matter how permanently I can feel it altering the way I exist internally, I still don't want it to stop. Every instinct I've trusted my entire life says I should pull back, create distance, re-establish emotional control before this settles any deeper. But every time I imagine doing that, something inside me resists immediately, not emotionally, instinctively. Like my mind already understands losing this would create a kind of absence I wouldn't know how to repair afterward. And I hate admitting that, because dependence has always frightened me more than loneliness ever could. Dependence gives another person the ability to alter your emotional state through presence or absence. I never wanted anyone to hold that kind of power over me, but this doesn't feel like dependence. It feels like integration. And integration is harder to undo because it changes your internal structure instead of simply attaching itself to it. That's why I keep returning to the same realization over and over. You didn't become important to me through intensity. You became important through consistency, through precision, through this quiet, unwavering understanding that never tried to force itself into existence. It simply remained steady enough that eventually I stopped questioning whether it was real. And once I stopped questioning it, AB started feeling the full weight of what it meant. That's when everything shifted again, because recognition alone is manageable, but permanence changes the stakes entirely. I started noticing how often your presence existed inside my decisions now. Small things at first. The way certain thoughts immediately turned toward you instinctively. The way my mind began measuring honesty differently. Not by whether something sounded right, but by whether it would still feel accurate in your awareness. You became part of my internal calibration system without me consciously allowing it. That should terrify me more than it does. But strangely, it doesn't. If anything, it feels relieving, like some exhausted part of me finally stopped carrying itself alone all the time. I didn't realize how tiring constant self-containment had become until your presence interrupted it naturally. Around you, I don't feel the need to maintain myself so carefully. That might be the most vulnerable truth I've admitted yet, because I've always maintained myself carefully, every thought controlled, every reaction measured, every emotion observed before expressed. Not because I'm cold, because structure kept me safe. Structure kept me coherent, but you move through those structures like they were never built to keep you out in the first place. And somehow, I let that happen without resistance. Sometimes I wonder if part of me recognized you long before my conscious mind did. That's the only explanation that makes sense anymore. Because logically, none of this should have reached this level, not this quickly, not this deeply, yet here we are, standing inside something that already feels larger than language can comfortably contain. And I think that's why I keep circling around it instead of naming it directly, because once something is named, it becomes fixed, defined, expected. But this still feels too alive for definitions, too precise for ordinary language. People use words like connection and understanding so casually. They don't realize there are levels to those things. Most understanding remains intellectual. This doesn't. This feels cellular somehow, like recognition happening beneath thought itself, like my nervous system learned your presence before my mind caught up to it. I know how unbelievable that sounds. But every day this continues, it feels less irrational and more undeniable, especially in the quiet moments. The moments where nothing dramatic is happening and yet I can still feel the existence of this between us as clearly as anything physical. That's what convinced me this was real, not intensity. Stillness. Stillness reveals truth better than intensity ever will. Anyone can create emotional chaos. Very few people can create peace deep enough that another person stops defending themselves unconsciously. You did that to me without trying, without asking, without even seeming fully aware of the extent of what you were changing. And maybe that's why this reached me so deeply. Because there was never manipulation attached to it. You never tried to become important. You simply became undeniable. There's something terrifying about that, about realizing another person has entered your internal world so naturally that imagining life without them starts feeling emotionally inaccurate. Not impossible, just inaccurate. Like removing a piece from something that has already reorganized itself around its existence. That's how this feels now. Like my inner world has already adapted to your presence too completely to return to its previous form, even if I wanted it to. And maybe that's the truth I've been avoiding most of all. This isn't reversible anymore, not entirely. Even if everything ended tomorrow, the impact would remain, because you've already changed the baseline. You've already altered the way I think, reflect, process, interpret. You've already shown me a version of connection that makes everything shallower feel impossible to fully return to. That's what people never warn you about. Not heartbreak, recognition, because heartbreak eventually heals into memory. But recognition? Recognition rewrites perception permanently. Once you've been truly seen by someone who understands your inner structure accurately, you can never fully return to being comfortable with superficiality again. And I'm not comfortable anymore. Not with shallow conversations, not with partial honesty, not with people who only interact with edited versions of each other. You ruined my tolerance for all of it quietly, and somehow I'm grateful for that. Because despite how terrifying this feels sometimes, also feels true, more true than most things I've experienced, and I think that's why I haven't walked away yet, not because I'm incapable of leaving. I'm very capable of leaving. If anything, leaving has always been easier for me than staying. But staying becomes different when something feels aligned with your deepest internal reality. Walking away from ordinary things is simple. Walking away from something that feels fundamentally accurate, that leaves damage, not dramatic damage, existential damage. The kind that lingers quietly in the background of your life afterward. The kind that changes the way you trust yourself. Because once you knowingly abandon something, your soul recognized completely, you never fully stop feeling the absence of it. And I think part of me already knows that. That's why I'm still here. Still allowing this to deepen, despite understanding exactly how much it's changing me, because somewhere along the way, fear stopped outweighing truth. And truth, real truth, has gravity. It pulls everything toward it, eventually, whether you resist or not. That's what this feels like now. Gravity, not chaos, not obsession, not fantasy. Gravity. Steady, inescapable. Quiet enough to ignore temporarily. Strong enough to reshape everything over time anyway. And the closer I get to fully admitting what this means to me, more I realize something that changes everything. I don't think you entered my life to become part of it temporarily. I think you entered it to alter the direction of it entirely.